Quilt designs are commonly based on squares or triangles, even circles. But did you ever think of the term column when envisioning a quilt? Well, probably not. After viewing this two-part mini-series, you might add that word to one of the options when describing patchwork. The Scrappy Column Quilt is a featured linear design of this program. As the name implies, use leftover fabrics with dimensional inserts to create easy-to-sew columns. Column quilts, that's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. And amazing designs and Class A needles.
This Scrappy Column Quilt is a great project to make for a baby shower or give to a granddaughter or daughter or niece, nephew. It has a lot of texture in it, great color, and the piecing is really not pieced, it's all folded sections. So even beginners can create something that's very visually stimulating for a child to kind of play around with, as well as interesting to sew. This can be created from scraps from your treasure chest of fabric, or by buying small amounts of fabrics and combining them together, or maybe a little bit of both. Here are the collections that we use to create this quilt. Purchasing larger quantities of the columns, separating the interesting texture and scrappy columns, and then using these fabrics for the detail inside. Now, these are fat quarters. Remember, that's the size that's 18 by 22. Well, you could certainly use flat quarters or scraps. It really doesn't matter. Our samples are going to be more specific in size, but you may have smaller pieces if you'd like. The columns vary in width, the scrappy columns, from 3 inches to 4 inches. So underneath, I have cut some of my fabrics, those widths, stacked together, all the 4 inches and some of the 3 inches together. And then cut another grouping for the accents, for the dimensions. Squares from 2, 3, and 4 inches, a variety of fabric colors. You may even want to have some rectangles cut. This stack is 3 by 4, and you can see I have lots of fabric included. The first step after getting your tools, or your fabrics all cut, is to do a lot of pressing. Rather than piecing together areas, we'll just simply press them. And you can be creative with this. Just press something in half will give it dimension. You could press down a corner. And that could be one of the dimensional pieces. The rectangles, now we're on squares. I guess this is a square. You can fold one diagonally in half from point to point. You can make prairie points. Prairie points are folded in half, and then the middles are folded to the center, or the ends are folded to the center. That's one other design. Oh, let's see, we can create some uneven sides, create some points with dimension. You probably will come up with more ideas than I'm showing you right now. Let me just take a little time to showcase what we have on our sample board so you can see the progression of just some simple dimensional areas. Just folding that square point to point in half, making a trapezoid by folding down one of the corners, folding down both corners in this area. And this light blue or medium blue is a traditional prairie point. So we cross over. This was a scrap of fabric that's not the same width. You might have those in your scrap box, went from narrow to a little bit wider. You could cut those in strips, either 3 or 4 inches. And then the folded sections can simply have one end folded up, both ends folded up, and the traditional just fold of a rectangle. This is not difficult. This is just pressing fabrics, making it interesting. You just want to have a finished edge, a folded edge that's going to be visible on the outside, and the cut edges are included in a seam. Now, to include these in a seam is what we're going to do next. Use some of these pieces and pin or place them on your fabrics. They could go, this one would have to go in the corner, this could go in the side, we'll catch it in a seam, you'll see in a minute. And let me just show you what we have pinned out on this sample. Just lay it down, even having the raw edges. That's the point of this. We'll enclose those in just a few minutes, but make an interesting collection of fabric. Lay it out so it's visual to whomever is going to be receiving this. Little children will have fun just kind of touch and feel of these different shapes and sizes, and perhaps you may even consider, if it's washable, to include other types of fabric. Little children always like satin, or perhaps some touch of nap fabric for some extra texture. So you make it visual, lay it out the way you'd like it to be. The next step is to do the sewing. Just sewing tucks into fabric, sewing fabric edge to edge, and I'll show you how that can be created just with a straight stitch at your sewing machine. Creating a scrappy column quilt would be a perfect project to do with your favorite little person that could sit on your lap, help you do some folding and sewing, as my boys, who are now much older, used to do when they were little. You'll soon see that this is not difficult. This is simple sewing with the scraps of fabric that have been pinned into place. Now you may think, what are you going to do about all these raw edges? Well, we're going to tuck them away and close them in a seam. And so that I have a straight edge, I'm going to do some little pre-pressing first of all, just kind of after I have this all positioned, just take it over to my little pressing surface and give the fabrics a press so that I have a nice crisp edge to use as a guide. And I don't always do the pinning at this point, just pressing so that I have an edge to go by, and align the straight edges and give it a press. And just keep on doing this wherever I have a pin. So here's one more. You can see this is not difficult. It's just planning, and with lots of fabric colors, interesting dimensional shapes, you have a variety of colors to work with, and you're not piecing anything. You're not having to turn corners or do some cutting. It's all folding and dimensional. And my machine, I have it set up for traditional patchwork sewing with a presser foot that's 1/4 of an inch wide on the right side, perfect for quilting, a quilting needle, all-purpose sewing thread both in the needle and the top. Clean that machine after every use, and then put in a clean bobbin and thread, and you're ready to sew. Across the top of this particular, the two squares folded on point, I simply am just going to sew along the edge, not a 1/4 of an inch seam, just to catch it down. So I have contrasting thread. You don't have to use contrasting thread for this. But now I'm getting to my raw edge, so I'm simply going to fold it in half, find my press mark, align the edges, try to keep the column straight, so make sure certain that these lines are straight. Place the fabric along the right side of the presser foot and stitch. There isn't any way that I can give you yardage for this project because everyone's scrappy column quilt will vary in size and shape. It depends how close together you place your accents, your dimensional accents. This one, you can see that little tuck on the underside. You may have them the strips 3 inches wide or 4 inches wide. So this is truly a free-for-all as far as yardage goes. You may be adding fabrics, adding columns. You can make it any size you'd like. Later in this program, you'll see that we made this not just for children. It can be an adult quilt using different color combinations. And I'm just going to keep on sewing here, aligning my edges, matching that fold, and doing a little bit more sewing. This is all there's to it. Now, some of the squares that we folded are different sizes. So let's take a look at one of the options we have here. Layout is almost endless as far as combining two squares that have been, these are really half square triangles, folded half square triangles overlapped end to end. If you were to piece this design, it would take a lot of work. If you just place the folded pieces on the strip of fabric, it can be done in seconds. Some of the prairie points are narrower than the width of the strip, so just align them on the side of the strip. And here again, we just have another rectangle folded in half. So just stitch it down. And I'll just do some quick sewing here to hold this in place. And then we'll talk about attaching the strips together. We'll just cut it. And I said we should press it, but I'm not going to press this one. I'm going to just quickly sew it. And you can just see how you can assemble this. This is kind of a great project to make in short periods of time because you could sew 20 minutes and get one column made, and the next day sew another 20 minutes. That's the way I like to sew. And you could quickly get some things finished. So it just takes a little time to be creative. And this is all there's to it. Now, after you have quilted patchwork to section, as I have done here, then attach it to another section, meeting right sides together, creating a seam so that you'll have a variety of quilt column designs. You'll see soon that we'll take these columns, a variety of columns, and bridge them together with these strips that help visually break up the design so that you can appreciate what's taking place in the designs. A lot of texture, and now the next step, as you might guess, is just sewing the scrappy columns to the bridging strips. After sewing all the columns that you need for your quilt, straighten the edges, and then add, as I mentioned, the bridging strips. Cut 2 inches wide in a contrasting color to give some visual break to your eye. Add a strip to the right side of each of the column, meeting right sides together. You're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance and press the seam allowances to the bridging strip. So attach these to the right side, with the exception of adding a bridging strip to both sides of the left column. I think you can see why. So you'll have a much wider and much longer quilt than I have right here. On this next set of samples, everything has been stitched, pressed to the bridging strip, and backing has been cut for each strip. Now you may have to piece this as well. You can make this scrappy as well, and then cut batting. Now the batting is traditional cotton or polyester fleece batting, whatever you normally put in a quilt, but this time we're cutting it the size of the strip. Measure your strip width, cut long strips. Now all of the seams are going to be vertical because we're putting these columns together, and there's going to be some bulk in here. So a trick that we'd like to pass along to you is after you've cut the polyester fleece, the batting, whatever you'd like to put in the middle of your quilt, attach or place a pinking blade into your rotary cutter and just give it a little haircut, trimming off, not a lot, but some of the edges so that you're going to remove some of the bulk from this area. You'll see on the samples that I have that that trimming is already completed. Just a little bit of trimming will go a long way. Now we have the quilt pieces all lined up. You would have these pinned together. Well, not all pinned together. Let's pin together the far right column first of all. We have the top, the patchwork, the back, and you can see some stitching. We've met all wrong sides together and channel stitched down through the middle along the seam of the bridging strip, and then stitched the edges together. Now you're only going to do this with one of the columns, not all of them, just one. And we're starting with the right, so we'll start with the right side. Then for subsequent rows, to put it all together, since these are small, narrow pieces, we can get by with just sewing the strips together along the vertical edge. So meet with right sides the next column to the top area that we have here. And you'd pin along this edge, and then on the underside, you'd place the batting and the backing and pin. Now you can see a close-up that I'm sewing this seam. I'm about in the middle of the seam, sewing with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, creating the entire length, sewing the entire length of the seam. Then after sewing, Fold these columns to the right side, and you can see that the seam has been stitched and your column is ready to add to the next column. First, you may want to sew the side of that finished column together, then add all the seams that you need. You can make this quilt in another look. Rather than making it in this bright juvenile print, consider making it in jewel tones. Here's a jewel tone quilt that we created, much larger. We spaced the dimensional pieces further apart. Same concept, using scraps of fabric, using column stitching, and it's a great project to sew together. Practically any design may be given a fresh look by thinking of a column arrangement rather than a block or square layout. Adding bridging strips to a 4-patch and solid block combo gives the illusion that the blocks are suspended in a sea of green. Here are a few tips in adapting the column concept to more traditional block designs. In this, again, a child's quilt size, we've used a very, very traditional block, the 4-patch. But by having columns of the same color and squares in between, as I mentioned, it gives that suspension look. I'm rather fond of this very simplistic design. You could adapt practically any design, quilt pattern design that is, into a column version, and that's what I'm going to show you now. You're going to get a little abridged version of how to create a 4-patch design. So very briefly, sew 2 strips together of fabric and then make a second pair. Stack together, meeting opposite colors, and then cut into the same width of strip that you initially cut. So my strips were initially 2.5 inches. I subcut them into 2.5 inches. And then you can chain stitch them together to create the blocks. In other words, they're sewn together just the way they were cut, sewing along one edge, and presto, you get 4 patches. To start the column concept with any block that you may choose, doesn't have to be a 4-patch, could be any block, then align the blocks, the design blocks, onto a solid strip of fabric, the same width as your finished block, and stitch along the edge. And as you can see, the block is starting to form. The column is starting to form, and then you simply cut between the areas. And you may want to square these up a little bit more than I'm going to be able to do right now. And you'd sew these end to end, alternating strips. So we'd sew these end to end. Now I'm working with flannel. It's great for kids. It's pre-wash the fabric though, my suggestion, because it will shrink a little bit more than traditional quilting fabric. Then after you have started to create the columns, you lay them out, and to get this suspended look like we have achieved with this quilt, alternate so that you have alternate blocks starting at the top areas. Here, let's get it the correct way so that I have a patchwork, a solid, a patchwork, and you can see how the illusion starts. And with the same technique used earlier with the scrappy column quilt, we added a bridging strip on the right side, and on the final column on both sides. And there you have the concept. This whole quilt was assembled in the same way that we worked with earlier, by cutting the batting the same size as the column, and then cutting the backing. We used alternate colors so you could see how easily this would go together, and doing the sandwiching technique that I showed you earlier in this program. You could also add borders. Just instead of adding columns, you would add a horizontal strip at the top and at the bottom of the quilt. So the whole concept of working in columns with your quilt design, whether it's scrappy, planned, or adapting a traditional quilt design to a column, is easy to do. Great for a beginner project, a FATS project, or anytime you need a quick quilt. I'd like you to virtually step back in time to the 1920s to about 1930. The topic, sewing, millinery, and cookery. Instead of learning to sew and quilt from TV, you're a student of the Women's Institute of Domestic Arts and Science. My guest will be your guide. Welcome back, Amy Bjorkman, a Sewing with Nancy guest in the past, now a Nancy's Corner guest. Good to see you again, Amy.
It's great to be back, Nancy.
With your business of designing patterns and projects, you often research vintage artwork, and that brought you to a new place.
It did. The Women's Institute. I was searching for artwork and I came upon some wonderful newsletters. I was inspired not only by the artwork, but after reading the newsletters, I realized just how timeless the material was in the newsletters. And I'm showing you some pages here. There's essays in the newsletters, cookery, fashion advice, just a wonderful collection of material that actually I felt was just so relevant for today. It seemed like I was compelled to share it.
Well, not only are there fashions and ideas, but what's so interesting is to learn about the correspondence courses.
Yes, this magazine was part of a program that taught women to sew through the mail. So they would correspond back to the Institute headquarters, and they would also communicate with other women with interest in sewing via clubs that were created, as well as actually classifieds that the Institute did to encourage the women to communicate with each other.
Now, today we think of social networking, marketing. They had social networking, but by mail.
By mail, exactly. Here are some examples of those classifieds, and also the women's question box. So the Institute was just a wonderful resource to women of the 20s.
It was a lifeline to a lot of people who lived in rural areas.
It truly was, and it was exciting to see the beautiful artwork and the meaningful material, and so that's what led me to publish Vintage Notions, this book that I just am thrilled to share with you today.
And because we can't all read these, because these newsletters are few and far between, you compiled some information together, and why don't you read some of the correspondences, because they're very touching.
I will do that.
And very interesting.
This is one of my favorites that just explains the woman's appreciation of her course. My Women's Institute course has meant a savings of much actual cash and of infinite worry. It has proved the most profitable investment my husband and I ever made. It has given me the ability to express my own personality in clothes that are mine and not to be duplicated. It has given me something that is more than all of these, faith in my own two hands.
We still need that faith in our own two hands today.
We do, we do. The patterns were another part of the Institute that I just really thought you'd be interested in learning about as well. I'm going to show you, I'll flip open the book. This is the page that is the men's shirt for put to feminine use. And it's actually a pattern that teaches you to take a men's dress shirt and turn it into an apron. So we can,
Sure.
it's just a fun, simple garment with the bias tape as the edging. And there's several different, each month that is a chapter of the book has a different pattern that we've included.
Well, how fascinating. These magic patterns that many times they just gave dimensions. No tissues, just cut here, cut there, measure.
Exactly. And we actually tested the patterns as well and made sure that what we followed would work for everyone.
Now, this institute was in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Yes, and in Scranton, Pennsylvania, there was a woman, her name was Mary Brooks Picken, and she founded this institute in 1916. She was there for 9 years, and they built the program to 300,000 women who'd taken the course.
300,000 women in the 1916 through the middle of, almost to 1930.
Correct.
Because it lasted a little bit longer than 9 years.
Yes, yes it did. It actually flourished into the 30s, and then Mary, her work and her writing really inspired me throughout this journey. And so I was able to use many of her essays that are part of the book. Very inspiring. She actually went on to write the Singer Sewing book that sold over 8 million copies.
Our just kind of, we're learning about our history of our craft and our art.
It's a wonderful history, and it's so fun to bring it into modern times and share it with people.
You know, Amy, sewing and quilting and embroidery really haven't changed over the years, and I thank you. They've changed, but our interest in working with our hands is still so important. And thank you for sharing this and this fascinating story. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the Women's Institute of Domestic Arts and Sciences, as I have. Well, this wraps up our two-part series on column quilts. I hope you've enjoyed this series. Thank you for joining with me. Bye for now.
Nancy has written a fully illustrated book entitled Column Quilts that includes all the information from this two-part series. It's $14.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2415. Order item number BK2415, Column Quilts. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at sewingwithnancy.com for more information on this program. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Classe Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Rowenta. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.